What up, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third studio album of 3 Days Grace. This album came out in the fall of 2009. It's been a while since I've reviewed a record by 3 Days Grace. Last time I reviewed them was back in 2016 when I reviewed their 2006 album 1X. So I particularly like that project and it definitely stood out to me. I bought this album as well, but now upon listening to it fully and seeing some of the concepts behind it, I kind of have more stuff to say about it. So what I would have to say about this project is it's not, I don't feel like it's as good as 1X, but it just tries a multitude of new things, including trying like some post-grunge styles and not quite being as ferocious as it was on their 2006 album. Like I feel like the energy of songs like Animal I Have Become and Pain and some of those singles from 1X, it just the energy and the bite of that album is not quite there, but it's just kind of a more balanced breakfast this time around, where I feel like this is kind of the concept. You're just getting a lot more angles within a short 12 song package, and that's kind of the concept about it. I felt like probably the best song on this whole album is the lead single Break. I definitely feel like that's such an excellent song, and that definitely reminded me of their 1X day. It definitely reminded me of their 1X days. Definitely felt like a leftover from that time period. But I just would have to say it, like I said, it tries some new stuff. It has hard rock on here this time, and it's kind of alternative metal. I kind of felt like these guys were kind of more of, I mean, they weren't electronic, but they were just kind of like a very woozy and kind of like moody, kind of mild emo or mid emo kind of like alternative metal and alternative rock type stuff, but they don't do alternative rock as they don't do alternative rock as much this time around, as much as they do kind of a mild taste of alternative metal. And I'm just gonna have to call it like I see it. I don't really think that they pull off post grunge that well. I kind of don't see them as being much of post grunge artists. I mean, I feel like Creed and Stained and Nickelback and some of those type ones just do it way better. And like there's someone else that did it around that time. I forget. Puddle of Mud, some of those type people that they're pretty much pros at it. It's just very odd hearing post grunge music in 2009, because that was about 8, 9, 10 years after like post grunge was really cresting and that type of stuff. When you think of some of those folks, Puddle of Mud and Nickelback and Stain back in 2001, 2002, 2003, and just to hear it way out, because this album charted in late 2009, but it actually made it to like early 2011, so it had like a pretty much 18-month window of promotional cycle for this project. So that meant that you were hearing songs in the early 2010s from an album that came out in the 2000s. That was kind of the thing. But I really feel like hearing post grunge type stuff around the early 2010s. I'm not terribly used to how post grunge kind of transformed by the time it got way out in 2009, 10, and 11. But from what I saw, it just was not like, I think that 3 Days Grace have alternative metal better down than they do post grunge or hard rock. So that's kind of the thing. But I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the singles, because there were 4 of them, and I kind of feel like this project is not a mixed bag, but it's just like a hair or two above a mixed bag, and that's kind of the concept about it, where it is good, but it just kind of feels underwhelming in a lot of ways. So I'm going to talk about that. But so the first single is Break, and like I said, this in my opinion is the best song off the whole 12-song album, and this really worked out outstandingly well. This is a mid-tempo, kind of high mid-tempo kind of song. This has a perfect kind of more drum oriented, kind of low key guitar kind of beat on there that really is infectious, and it's just different from a lot of stuff. I really have always liked, as long as I've heard this song, I've always liked the kind of production on I've always low key kind of liked the production on Break. It's just got an outstanding hook, and it feels like a leftover from 1X, definitely in some of their prime days when they had songs like, I mean, this is still kind of their prime days too. This hit #1. They had 3 #1 songs on the rock chart, so they definitely were still doing great, but it's just kind of a different context. This one just has a real ferocious energy. Break does. Great hook on there. Definitely reminds me of like Pain and the Animal I Have Become, and some of those hits that were like this. I mean, 3 Days Grace hits #1 a lot on the rock chart, so it's just kind of one of those situations. But this definitely has ravenous energy, just a brilliant lead single and a great kickoff to the album. The second single was The Good Life, and this is another kind of party cut too. This one may not be as ferocious as Break, but it definitely is in the same vein and kind of makes for like a nice 1-2 punch on this album and stuff. I would definitely have to kind of say that. This one is kind of more of like a rock bar kind of pub and that types. I mean, it can be a dance club song, not as much as Break is, but I do kind of feel like this is kind of more at like a night venue where there's going to be drinks and that sort of thing. It just has kind of a more at the venue type stuff, or the Break is kind of more and just kind of getting excited for the evening and that type of stuff. But the Good Life is definitely at the night venue and that sort of thing. It's kind of in a rock pub, someplace like that, where it's just going to be like a hard rock kind of bar. I mean, this one is kind of a hard rock single. This one's not quite as alternative metal as the other one, as Break, but it does have a pretty good effectual feel. And this is an example of 3 Days of Grace kind of doing a light taste of hard rock that I enjoyed, and it definitely felt kind of alternative in a sense too. It's just kind of a blend. It's kind of mainstream rock, but it's also kind of alternative, and I just feel like I like The Good Life, but I definitely like the production on Break more. I do think it's a great 1-2 punch, but it's just kind of, I don't know. Sometimes bands they'll ditch kind of the alternative sound for more of like a hard rock sound, and it just kind of, you know, I'm not going to say it's bad, but you just notice it. It's kind of like, hey, this is kind of out of their element a bit. So, but this is another one that deserved to hit number one on the the rock charts. This is definitely a great song. So the third single is World So Cold. The third single is World So Cold, and this is a post grunge song. This is definitely one that was kind of similar to Stained and Puddle of Mud and some of those type people and Nickelback. I just would have to say this one really kind of feels like a woozy, kind of just in your car and kind of breezy, kind of hazy kind of day, cold and cloudy and overcast kind of day and stuff. Just perfect for like the fall, like a breezy kind of a cool kind of September, October kind of night, some or evening, something like that. It's kind of reminded me of just like Aaron music, not so much a party song, not so much a Friday night song, but just a very much Aaron running, kind of getting bills paid kind of song, just kind of more traversing about the day, just getting some of your tasks taken care of. But it is a good one. I would listen to this, maybe not so much on the weekend, but definitely just across like a regular kind of day where you've got other stuff to do and that sort of thing. So that is a hit. Like I said, this is a multitude of angles that they cover. It's not quite as party oriented as it was on 1X, at least in the singles. The fourth single was Lost in You, and this was, like I said, World So Cold dropped as a single in August of 2010. So that was a year after the album came out. And this one, Lost in You, the fourth single, crested as a single in early 2011. February of 2011 was when the promotion for this album finally wrapped. And this one is kind of like a blue collar song. I see it as necessary. It has the least amount of energy. Is definitely not a party song, and is just kind of just caught up in the romance and that type of stuff. This really comes off as like a nice work kind of, just got off work kind of typical day to day type attitude of just the sense of a substandard kind of blue collar kind of week and Monday through Friday type feeling for it. I could see this song being played a lot like 12 years ago, back when it was cresting and that sort of stuff. It's a factory made kind of work song and job song and that sort of stuff. Just kind of works. I don't like it. I definitely don't like this song as much as Break, and I don't like it as much for the most part. Yeah, I don't like this song as much as The Good Life either. The first two singles, those are both the craziest singles on the album, but I do feel like it is necessary to kind of have a multitude. So that's what 3 Days Grace did. Is they just gave you a variety of styles. That's what 3 Days Grace did. Is they gave you a variety of styles, two party songs, an Aaron running kind of post grunge song, and then a blue collar kind of typical mainstream rock kind of song. It's difficult to kind of label that genre on that one. But okay, so I'm going to talk about the rest of this album. I'm going to go ahead and recommend the 7 songs out of 12 I recommend to you, and then we'll get into that. So the 7 songs I recommend would be Break, World So Cold, The Good Life, Going Down, Bitter Taste, Without You, and Lost in You. So, but apart from the 4 singles that I enjoyed, I'm going to go ahead and say the other 3 songs, Going Down is definitely like another song very similar to Break and The Good Life. This one is definitely kind of like a night venue song. It has a great kind of eerie, kind of leery production on there. This is another kind of gloomy, kind of alternative one that brings back their classic sound and just works extremely well. It has that kind of moody energy about it. I feel like Without You is a club song. This is one that is kind of centered on the club. But the thing about this album that I'm just going to go ahead and say, a lot of this has a lot of heartbreak in it. I feel like the vocalist, who I think is the vocalist Adam Gontier, had a lot of kind of heartbreak on this project, where a lot of this moodiness kind of sinks through to some of the songs. Like you look after some of these, like Someone Who Cares, Without You, Lost in You, and like Last to Know, and some of these. I mean, a lot of these are just really kind of like centered on like heartbreak and being kind of in a more lovesick kind of attitude for the crest of the album, and it kind of impacts some of it just because it's not quite as carefree and quite as rambunctious as it was on like on their 2006 album 1X. It's just kind of something to know that a lot of these album cuts are kind of centered in like being kind of more hurt and glum and that type stuff, which kind of detracts from trying to get like some solitary album cuts that kind of go along with that. But I feel like Without You is a good example of a song that pulled off some of this kind of heartbreak gloominess, but kind of did it in like a good sense as far as trying to go out to the club. And it's just kind of a song where you got like a woman on your mind, but you're still going out to the club and you're trying to go out and forget about her. But it just kind of has the concept of the question of doing that and that sort of thing. It's just interesting, kind of get that, but it's just kind of a more like down and kind of slumpish kind of club song, but it's still a club song. I just would have to say it's got a good valve towards it. And then Bitter Taste, I really like this song. This is another example of one that's up there with Break. I would probably say if Break was the best song on here, I feel like apart from probably Going Down being number 2, and then The Good Life being number 3. I think this is Bitter Taste is definitely a top 5 song on here. It's either the third best song or the fourth best song. It's close. I would say The Good Life and Bitter Taste are pretty much tied. But this is a good example of one that has a great riff. This is a good just alternative rock kind of song that's like their old days. And this one is a really kind of sultry and flirty kind of song. I really feel like this has just got like a great like moody kind of energy towards it that just kind of comes off as like really kind of spicy in that sort of sense. I really like the concept behind it. It's the kind of stuff that Evanescence does a lot, except just with Amy Lee, but this time it's with it's the sort of song that Evanescence pulls off often enough with this kind of spicy kind of sultriness about it. And I feel like it's just a nice taste of what to kind of get there. Really like the aspect behind it. It's just a good one. This is the kind of spice that I think more songs on this album needed to have, because a lot of this is just glum, almost whiny, and just kind of very much just like in a down and out kind of attitude, just about how that sort of concept kind of goes. It just really feels like kind of lost in a lot of ways. The energy off this album kind of conveys a lot of lostness and just kind of depressant kind of downness about it. And that's just kind of like the concept about it. But I feel like when some of the energy kind of comes back and he gets back into the swing of having his game back, and some of these like Going Down, Bitter Taste, Break, and The Good Life, I feel like some of those are the more biting moments where this album kind of gets lost in its wallowed sorrows a bit. And some artists are good, some musicians are good about kind of carrying that energy, but I feel like trying to do that with like a post grunge and a more down tempo kind of ballad type atmosphere really didn't pull for this album very well. And that's kind of about the 5 songs that I have to complain about. Like some of these topics were kind of awkward and kind of questionable, like Bully and Someone Who Cares, and like Last to Know. Some of those were really kind of more glum and just kind of more personal defensive kind of songs and such. And No More was another example of that. That one was really kind of starry-eyed, and just the production was pretty much one of the worst ones on the album, was No More. And then Life Starts Now is the one that I would have liked. This is another one that was trying to be post-grunge and try to pull that off, kind of similar to World So Cold. But the problem with it is it just kind of had more edgy and kind of harder riffs for a post-grunge song that just doesn't fit that. I feel like post-grunge has to be kind of more mellow and kind of more lighter guitar licks in the song and just that sort of stuff. So this was kind of an awkward one because it was kind of coming off as like a metal song, but it was more like post-grunge metal more so than post-grunge rock the way it needed to be. So I just wasn't kind of vibing with Life Starts Now, the title track. But so there's just enough on here to kind of say I feel like some of the styles I would have liked to have seen 3 Days Grace pull off post-grunge a lot better. I mean, they really nailed it with World So Cold, but so much of the album was just really kind of wallowing and kind of in a pretty almost morbid sorrow the way that this album kind of turned out. I mean, luckily the whole album isn't like that, and there were some moments that do have some spice to it and some kind of This album does have a few cuts that have a real spicy and kind of high flaring up kind of energy that kind of breathes some life into it and gets it back on even grounds where it's not just so much glum about lost loves and that sort of situation. I just would have to say it's this kind of, you know, I feel like the spicier cuts have a better emphasis and just show off a more dominant style that suits this album a lot more. And it definitely reminded me of 3 Days Grace's old days with their hit album, uh, 1X, and that's definitely a vibe just because that had so many number ones. I mean, this album has number ones too, but it just kind of does it in a different context and it tries new things. But I feel like, in terms of being like a ravenous, rambunctious party cut, it's really not that this time. It just has a lot more balance and a lot more like diversified topics that you kind of in a short 12 song album. It just has less time for scurrying around and kind of being more rambunctious and that sort of stuff. So that just kind of happens to be the aspect. But because of that, I do feel like some of the record is just kind of a lot more glum and just kind of morbid and just kind of like a, I don't want to say wholesomely whiny sense, but just kind of in like a more kind of pitiful sense. I think maybe that's the word, is pitiful as far as that kind of goes. Not pitiful to the point where you're insulting them and making fun of them horrendously, but it's just kind of, it's like, damn, they're really out of it. This is kind of the thing. So if I give this album a 6.75 out of 10. I mean, me liking 7 out of 12, I'm going to give it a 6.75 because I liked enough of the records on here, but I was really expecting to wind up liking like 8 or 9 or even 10 out of 12 on here. I really thought that if there would have been more songs like Going Down and Break and Bitter Taste, I would have definitely said this album would have had it packed to the gills because I especially remember liking 1X. So it's just kind of, this album was kind of preoccupied with some personal kind of defensive demons this time around, which detracted from the experience. That just kind of happens to be the thing. So the social score, though, I will give like a 6.5 out of 10 because I feel like some of these moments are good, like Break, The Good Life, Going Down, Bitter Taste, and World So Cold are examples of some ones that really have like that social kind of affability. But this is not wholesomely a complete full runner of like a project for stepping out. Like I said, there's a taste towards it, but it's not the whole project that does that seemingly. So that's just kind of thing to pay attention to. But in terms of the future, like 3 Days Grace dropped an album in 2022, so I'll have to start getting to some more of these. I'm definitely going to review. I'm definitely going to review soon enough 3 Days Grace's 2003 albums. That's on the way, but I'm going to get the rest of these kind of taken care of as time goes along. We're going to see what's up with some of these. But this is above average, but it's just kind of the fact that it's just kind of the situation about it is it just kind of feels like it kind of feels haphazard. I mean, it's got some good moments, but in some cases it does feel haphazard at times.